Ben here. We're still on the lake. Hey, so this painting is first of the landscape, and it's done with Jordy's kit. So you can go back and reference those in there. Here's a mid-range watercolor paper. It's not arches. It seems to work pretty good. For this, it's 140 pound. And we're going to tape it down as normal. I've got some blue painter's tape. That might be a little stout for this, but what I do is I take it and I put it on my pants leg and get a little bit of the sticky off of it. That way it doesn't go and tear the edge of the paper when we pull it off the paper. So I'm just putting a border on there, probably a 1/4 inch. And it does two things. I'm not stretching the paper. That's way advanced stuff on there. There's the kit. It dries out overnight or over a few weeks, and you just go ahead and spray it. And this is what we're going to build today. So a dog watching his master out in the middle of the lake in the middle of the winter, ice fishing. So a lot of landscapes, you'll work in the upper third or the lower third, and that'll be your horizon line. So there's a little bit of, this is very, very beginner level, and we'll incorporate some stuff in there. I got a hair stuck on there. So I'm just taking some clean water and the larger round brush that's in that kit that we sent Jordy, and I'm going about 1/3 down from the top. So now I'm going into some phthalo blue there. And I'm just going to put a random pattern. This would be called wet in wet. Nothing exciting here. You can play with it and see how watercolor starts to work. I would not overwork it. For the first few times you do it. And I'll show you some minimalist stuff that works a little better later. And then we're going to put a little bit of I was going to say purple in there, but it's not purple, kind of a mauve color, and then a little bit darker on the corners, leaving the centers light. And this is just a random pattern. It's not meant to represent anything. And that violet, I said purple, but it's really violet. That violet there, I kind of want to leave that as a cold reference in the upper corner there. You'll see when you get to that. So there's what it looks like when it's dry. You notice it left a watermark, but it left a watermark at the bottom on or a bloom, they call that. And I'll take care of that in just a second. You see that bar of light coming down through there? Poof, gone, just like that. Took me that long to figure out that was shining through the window, through the shade. So I'm just taking some water. And this is going to be the tree line across the lake on the horizon. So I'm putting a little bit of blue and green in there, and a touch of Payne's gray. And you can play with these colors all on your own to see what you want. I did wet that down, so once again we're painting wet in wet. And now I'm going to start to speckle across here with a tree line. And the concept that I got in my head here is a little bit of a hill on the right-hand side, and then a little bit of a hill up on the left-hand side, so the center there. And this will work out good later on when we start to do a few sunset landscapes. And this is a real simple landscape. Keeping in mind, everything in the background of this is going to be muted or diffused. So when you start playing around with perspective and distance estimation, depth perception, that kind of thing, everything in the background is going to be lighter with an absence of detail. It'll be a little bit blurrier. So I grabbed some Payne's gray in there and a little bit of blue. I wanted to darken that bottom line up there where the trees come down into the base. And I'm just messing around here, not doing anything particularly. And there's a darker mixture of Payne's gray. And there'll be some shadows for some trees, and you can see it's all diffusing down through there. And you'll notice that the bottom and left-hand corner there, I've got quite a puddle appearing, and that's where the water stopped. So I didn't wet that below that. I just want to kind of get that up in the tree. So I just picked the paper up and tilted it. You'll notice that I put that orange piece of paper in there and to tilt the top a little bit from top to bottom, probably a 20-degree angle. I think my table's on about a 10-degree angle, so that's a drafting table. And this is the first setup with the new lighting, and I kind of like it. The only thing that I'm going to say is that I do bump the table. I've got the camera set, and it's apparently up against the edge of the table, and I apologize for that early on here. So I grabbed a rigger, or a smaller brush for lack of better reference, and now I'm just going to start to put in some individual treetops and work this thing a little bit while it's still wet. Now most things, trees particularly, various different stuff like that, in a painting, there's kind of a rule that you don't want them to be even. So meaning no number 2, number 4, 2 of an item is not enough. 1 obviously is a focal point. The magic number seems to be somewhere between 3 and 5 groupings. And you can see I kind of blew that a little bit by a couple of those in the middle. There's 1, 2, 3 right in the center that have 2. But as they go up on the hill, the trees would be bigger and coming out a little bit in the corner. And you can notice that I sped a lot of this up, and I had a little bit running down, and then I liked the way it was setting up. So there's what it looks like as it starts to dry. You can see that it's going to be kind of hazy in the background there. So there we go. That is almost dry. Now I'm going to put some shadows down, and I just took a water wash on the larger flat, probably a 1-inch flat, and I'm just kind of a nice dark line, and then I'm going to mess around here. Now this is a little darker than normal, and in fact this entire painting is a little more vivid than a lot. You can go very lightly with very light washes and make this still an interesting painting. I kind of went with a little bit more vibrant colors and a little bit more pigment in there so that you could see what I was up to. But watercolor does not film well, and it looks better in person, especially if you're standing about 4 or 5 feet away from it. Watercolor is just kind of fun to play around with, and you probably think that too. Either you like to watch the painting or you like to watch they're trying to figure out how to do it. I'm not the expert at this. In fact, I barely know what I'm doing. So if you're interested, you can get started off of these tutorials, and I'll take you through what I can do and what I know. And keep in mind that the paintings are done very quickly, and they're done for your benefit, for a teaching element. So I came back in with a little darker element. You can see over there those on the palette. I'm mixing green and blue and a little bit of Payne's gray. I came back with the blue wash because I didn't like the way that was doing. And I'm going to take some of it off with the tissue paper. Now, I'm back in with the rigger, and what I'm going to do is play across here. And again, we're going 2 times so you don't have to painfully watch me play around with this stuff. And what I'm doing is I'm catching the tips of those trees where they would be shadowing down over the front of the lake there. This will have snow on it, and it'll be a snow-covered lake, as you saw. And the whole concept is a dog sitting by a tip-up where his master has told him to stay there, and he's walked halfway across the lake to take a fish off a tip-up in the middle. So I'm just kind of looking up above there. I'm not trying to get exact, but and getting a wiggly motion on it, which translates over if you're painting water. It doesn't necessarily paint or translate over on snow. It wouldn't have as much of a wave effect. Now I taking a paper towel and I'm just pulling a little bit of color out of there to give us some highlights. Okay, so you see the bottom of the shadows there, and I zoomed in, and now's the time to put the tip up in. And here's what happens if you don't like the color. So I didn't like that. It was a little bit too dark for me, and I just took it away. And then I switched back in. So I'm using a little burnt sienna here, and then I'm going to paint in the tip up. And keep in mind, watercolor, the first one doesn't get it. It's not like working. A lot of times if you're working with oils or you're working with acrylics, then you'll get the amount of paint that you want on there. A lot of times watercolor, you end up starting with kind of what I call a wash. And watercolor goes on a lot darker than it dries. So you'll put it on and you'll think, man, you screwed that up. It's way too dark. Give it 10 minutes and it will lighten up for you. And then you can come back with subsequent washes over it. So we need a pup, and I'm looking, trying to see where I want to put the man. So the dog is in silhouette from the back, and he's looking out and wondering why he can't go and why he has to hang out right there. By that, doesn't get to go across the lake. So you can see I've got him pointed kind of right up there towards the left-hand side of the paper, and just to get a little bit of layout thing in there. I wouldn't want to put him in the middle. He is obviously the focal point, and then as you start to look at the painting to figure out what he's looking at, you look out there and you see the silhouette of a man working a tip up out in the middle of the lake. But I placed him off slightly to the left, in the left portion of that. If you put him in the center, it kind of wrecks the whole perspective or focus of the painting. And I did not like his shape early, so I'll fix it a little bit later on here. And you can see at the end, I'll show you a couple more of these that I did as I was playing around with the camera, trying to get the new camera set up to work the way I wanted it to work. So I basically painted this 3 times, and then I'll show you the card at the end that I painted a couple of years ago as a concept. So this is a blue mixture, light blue with a little bit of black in it, or not black, Payne's gray. And I just keep adding to it and trying to keep the shadow more to the left side, so it would be darker on the left side. And that's what I'm doing here, is putting in some black in the hole. So there's a hole in the ice here, and as we build the tip up, and I let each of these colors dry before I do this. One of the things you don't get to see in here, and I probably should put that in there, is I will stop and allow opposing colors or colors that are right next to each other. I'll let them dry so they don't bleed into the other. So that's a dark mixture of Payne's gray, taking the spring part of the pole, and I'm not going to paint the flag until that dries. But one thing you don't see is I do stop in the middle and let a lot of this dry. There would be the shadow of the dog, basically, and then obviously the tip up would be putting a shadow in there too. Now you could go a lot lighter than this here, and here I'm going to start making stuff dark. But here's just a hint of a man kneeling on the ice out by another tip up. And as farting around, you can see when you're making snow, it's kind of fun to make tracks. So there'll be footprints. They're going to get lost in the scribbling that I do here later. But there's the tip up, and you really don't need a whole lot of detail here because remember, he's halfway across the lake. But as you're looking at the focal point on this and trying to figure out what's going on, it's obvious there's a tip up, there's a dog, and the dog is staring out to the side. Now, remember what I talked about, letting everything dry? Everything here is dry, and I'm just going to put in some red Viridian Red, I believe. And that would be the tip up that's all set. And I'm going to put just a dot out here. Now you have to look at this in person to see that little red dot out there in the middle of the lake. All told, this was probably a 30-minute painting that included the filming and the various different stuff. I put a green hat on him. You can't see that there. And then later on I go back and change that to a blue hat. So like he's got a knit cap stock. A little bit of color, just a touch of color out in the middle. You can see over on the right hand side there, I'm rinsing my brush and I'm not working out of the tray unless I'm playing with the same color. That way you won't get a muddy color in there. So here's a light blue mixture, and I'm using the side of the brush. I got the brush kind of flat here, and I'm putting in what would be cold in the snow. Now this painting, I have done this painting with a lot more detail, and I've done it very lightly. That wouldn't have worked for this demo because you wouldn't be able to tell what I was doing. And like I said, watercolor looks better up close and personal because you get to see all the little details. There's a couple times where I'll zoom in and you'll get to see that. But I'm trying to keep a lighter mixture the further away in hue. And then as I get up closer to the viewer and the dog in the front, you can see I thought that was a little dark, and that's what the beauty of watercolor. You can take it right off. There's going to be more detail. Therefore, the colors would be just slightly darker than they were in the background. In the foreground, you can see I'm putting a little darker mixture in there. Now I am going to come back with some gouache and highlight these. But once I get this kind of scribbled in where I like it, I'm coming back with a liner brush and a little bit darker color than each of these, and I'm putting the final kind of a shadow effect in there to create the snow and the ice on the covered lake. And you'll notice that it is brighter and more color and a little bit more detail as you come up towards the front. And then as you get out there across the lake, things start to get kind of fuzzy. And that it tells you that there's a distance there to it. Also, the size of the man out there will give you a distance. Now, this is a kind of a fun painting to do with the dog fairly dark, and then just a light, almost pastel colors in there. Now, if you look up in the sky over there, you see that the shading. You got the blue on the left-hand side, and I just kind of let that, if you remember, let it do what it wanted to do. But it gives it, and these are cold colors, so it makes things look cold. Now, this is where I didn't like the shape of the dog. You can play around with various different silhouettes on your dog if you're doing a dog, and make it any kind of dog you want. This is just a mixture of the blue, the phthalo blue, and Payne's gray. And then I'm going, as I get down towards the left-hand side and towards the base of him, I'm going more Payne's gray, which almost turns into a black. And there I'm liking the shape of him a little bit better. He's got like a leg sticking out, fixing his butt. There's the white gouache, which would make this a mixed media. A lot of watercolor purists would not like the fact that you use that. And I zoomed in a little bit so you can see what I'm doing here. So I want to work a little bit around the ice hole there and put the snow in there. You can see there's just a silhouette of a man out there. And this is the only one that I don't let dry. Well, it does dry, but I use it out of the tube. And then I will water it down just a hair if I need to. Now you can let it dry and then water it. Is water based, but it seems to work better and brighter right out of the tube. The other watercolors in the tray, you just ignore them after you're done painting and let them dry, and then you take out your spray bottle and you spray your tray, and poof, they're ready to go again. And that's what makes watercolor kind of unique, unlike oil paints, which stick around, and then acrylics, which dry, and once they dry you can't really get them back. Watercolor, you just reconstitute that. As long as you stay out of that tray with the color in there when you're mixing, and you mix in the palette. So I'm coming back in with a little bit of darker burnt sienna, and then a little bit of Payne's gray, and messing around after I put the gouache around there to get the snow and the ice hole in there. That ice hole's a bad perspective. That would be more of an oval from where we're looking. And I'm just putting some shadows in around on what would be the snow. So there's the shoreline, and a little bit of snow going across the middle there. And as you can see, we're starting to come up to the end here. So now I'm using the side of the brush and kind of scrubbing across, and I'm putting a little bit of snow in the background there. And you can see that I thought it was a little bright. Everything in the distance should be lighter and fuzzy, and that gives you the illusion of distance because you don't have detail when things are further away from you. Now I'm not wiping it off here as we're in the foreground, because you'll be able to see this because it has the detail, and it's brighter as it's closer to you. Thought I'd throw a little in the trees in the background. You don't need to go anywhere near this amount of detail. This painting looks good. A lot lighter than this, but it would not have filmed well. So this is the part where my daughter says I made it look cold. So I took the white gouache, and then I'm flicking it around with snowflakes. You got to be real careful on one of them. I put way too many snowflakes on the dog, and you almost lose him if you overdo it. Now I will come back, and it's hard to tell unless you're up close and personal with this, but I do put a little bit of blue on there and flick a little bit of blue around too. And then there's a signature in the corner. And here's the fun part. This means that you're done, and you can throw it away. If it's no good, throw it in a drawer if you want to think about whether it's any good and look at it 6 months later. Or you can put it in a protector and send it off to the gallery. And when you're doing that tape, if you would put it against your leg or against your wool shirt or something, it takes a lot of the sticky out of it. You can't leave this stuff for a couple days because it will stick together. And you can see on my grungy board there is a nice little border, and then you could frame that guy. So there he is, and here's another one that I did when I was playing with the camera filming, and here's a third one with just a little bit of perspective. You notice that each one of them comes out a little bit differently, And then here is where it all started from. Here is a card that I did as a study trying to figure out how to do this. Now, I really like the dog in this one, and I put two people in this, and this one has minimal colors versus the one we just did. So there you go. Thanks a lot. This has been Ben One Studio on the Lake. Like, share, and comment.